Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound podcast. I'm your host, I'm Dana, how to grow at SaaS Group, a serial acquirer buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And here I chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business a success. And today, super excited about it. With me is Alex, founder and CEO of SaaStock. I've heard so much on the podcast about you guys. It's the biggest B2B SaaS conference in Europe, and Alex is also a host of the SaaS Revolution Show. So, welcome to SaaS Unbound.
Great to be here. Good to be on the other side of the microphone, I guess. Yeah, delighted to be on the show.
How does it feel to be on the other side? I'm always like terrified.
Do you know what? I don't know if I'm not sure if I've thought about it, if whether I have a preference or not. But yeah, I think generally I've done a lot of these, and I feel like pretty relaxed now. On either side, whether I'm the host or the guest, and I think it's nice to be a guest every now and then. Yeah, I look forward to these things, and yeah, hopefully it can be fun and helpful along the way.
Sure, absolutely. Well, like I said, so many founders came to the podcast and would say, if you want to network, if you want to build some relationship, if you want to know what people are doing in Europe in B2B SaaS, you have to be at SaaStock. And I just experienced the biggest FOMO because I couldn't go. Yeah, so I would love to know, first of all, your background and how you got to build it and what was the inspiration
Yeah.
behind it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they're absolutely right. If you want to network in SaaS and connect in SaaS, then SaaStock is the place to be. But I guess kind of like going into my background, I mean, look, I wasn't in events, I wasn't really in SaaS before, so you wouldn't think that it's a real kind of natural transition for me to be doing what I'm doing today, and having made it a success as well. So I think for like very quickly, I mean, like I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? And always, I think, had the entrepreneurial traits. Even like it's a bit cliche, but when I was a kid, I would build a lemonade stand and try and make money from that. I was making perfume in the back of my garden, trying to sell it to neighbors. Got a newspaper around as soon as I could. I had an illegal sweet shop at school, and I got in trouble for that. So I used to buy sweets after church on a Sunday. Got my dad to kind of, maybe the only reason I went to church was so that I could go to the sweet shop afterwards, buy loads of sweets, and then sell them at school, for a markup, right? And I think that was something innate in me, that I was very interested in, business, although not knowing really that it was business at the time, and kind of making money. And then throughout my 20s, I had a million and one ideas, but I never acted on any of them. So then I was getting to 30 years of age, and I'd then sort of been a sales executive for a number of years and selling other people's technology. And I was starting to kind of fall out of love with that a little bit, right? And I was starting to think, and by all means, 30 is not old. I'm much older now, but 30 is not old. It's very young. But I thought, like, look, when I'm getting to 30, like if I'm not an entrepreneur in my 30s, then it's likely never going to happen. And actually, that's not true, because I mean, a lot of people become first-time founders, in their 40s or even 50s, and so on. So age isn't too much of a barrier. But psychologically, for me, that was kind of the tipping point to say, look, I really want to start a business, and I got to act on this, and you got to figure out what it is. But lo and behold, as the world works in funny ways, whilst I had all these ideas in my 20s, which I never acted on, when I said, okay, I really, must become an entrepreneur, I didn't have an idea, right? So I didn't have this grand idea to build SaaStock, and, then went ahead to build it. So what I did, I was doing some things to put myself outside of my comfort zone. So I thought, look, I've never written a blog before. Why don't I start blogging? Right. And what am I going to blog about? Well, I'm selling cloud computing software, so let me look into this sort of direction. And then I started learning, reading more about SaaS. And then when I was looking at SaaS blogs, I saw that at the time that the SaaS blogs that were out there were really kind of either VCs that were putting out and publishing a few blog posts, or there were some vendors. Some of the platforms that were out at the time were also putting out blog posts, but nothing was really kind of coming from a neutral space, a non-biased space, as I would call it, or from that community angle. So I quickly grabbed onto that sort of idea and opportunity, looked into it, spoke to a bunch of people, and thought, I'm going to come up with a SaaS magazine, right? And I'm going to call it SaaScribe. But then and maybe like say like the lack of experience kind of at the time, lack of capital, and really kind of the know-how of how to get access to capital, really kind of started with me actually not doing the magazine, but just writing some blog posts, right? And I quickly realized, look, I've never been a SaaS founder or an operator. I'm also pretty new to the topic, right? Why is anyone going to really kind of read what the content that I'm pushing out? Because I'm not the expert, right? I'm an imposter, right? What are people going to learn from me? So I thought, well, that's a weakness, right? How do I fix that weakness? Well, let's get people to write, that are experts. So I started reaching out to a bunch of people that were experts within the various different disciplines within, building a SaaS company, whether they were like customer success experts or growth experts, and so on. But people that would be, have done it before, and that were, I would say at the time, kind of up and coming influencers. I just reached out to them and said, hey, look, I'm creating this community, online publication or blog, SaaScribe. It's to help SaaS founders and their teams, grow their businesses. Would love you to write for SaaScribe. And then really people bought into the why of what of what we were doing. The fact that it was a community kind of driven, the fact that it was going to help other SaaS founders, the fact that there was no other, I guess, kind of blog like it at the time. And so people dedicated and gave up their time to write original content for SaaScribe without being, receiving any payment. And before I knew it, I was then in this kind of editor like role and position where I was then, sourcing the content and publishing it on the blog. And, before we knew it, we were doing, 3-4 posts a week. Then we had a newsletter. Then I decided to supplement that with the podcast, which you mentioned at the beginning, the SaaS Revolution Show. So I threw, again, putting myself into an uncomfortable position. I'd never hosted a podcast before, didn't really know anything about podcasting. But I thought I'll do the podcast and, kind of see how that goes. And honestly, like I was probably throughout the first year, very nervous going onto every podcast. And I thought again, had that imposter syndrome, which probably, I mean, very genuine. And in terms of, I'm speaking to these founders who are running SaaS businesses. I've not done it. Like, how am I going to be able to converse with them and ask them the right questions? So, we launched the podcast, and I think it was one of the first B2B SaaS podcasts at the time. So this is back in 2015. So I had the blog, the newsletter, the podcast, and then I thought, what else can I do here? I'd like to, get the audience together and, in a physical event, right? And I saw that there were no meetups happening in London in SaaS. I thought, this is really strange, right? Why is nobody doing this? So I had the bull by the horns and thought, look, I'm going to pull together a meetup. We did that. 120 people came from all over the UK. It was a really good event. You could see in people's faces, and they spoke to me, and they were so thankful that somebody had taken the initiative to pull this together. And it was a really good kind of feeling and a moment and achievement that was obviously a success. So before I knew it, I had inadvertently built an audience of SaaS founders and execs that were consuming the content. SaaScribe was on the radar. The podcast was having good guests on. People were listening to it. People were coming to the meetups. The next thing they said to me is, Alex, why don't you do a big conference? We need a big conference in Europe, right? You seem to be the person to do it. And I was like, well, what do I know about running conferences? Like, nothing. I've never done it before. But I did think this was a good idea. And at the time, all I was doing with the blog and the podcast, none of that was revenue generating. So I was looking for a way to, let's say, escape, but leave my full-time job to go into this full-time. But obviously I needed revenue to be able to support me to do that. And I had looked at advertising before, I had looked at some forms of sponsorship, nothing really kind of panned out. So I thought, like, well, events was the last chance saloon, the way to kind of monetize this. And because I'd built this audience, I'd done this customer development work, and then I went to the audience and I said, look, if I do this conference, will you attend? Will you exhibit? And people said, yes, we'll become a sponsor if you put this together. So I got the date, I got the venue, then I got the date. I built the website, and then I went back to the people and said, hey, you said you would sponsor this. It's happening, September 2016. Sign up. Here's the term sheet, sign up to be a sponsor. And they did. And that was kind of really the, I guess, kind of the story of how SaaStock kind of came about. And through that, then we were customer funded, through sponsorship and delegates. And when we started selling tickets, because we had this email list, I went out, we sold tickets. I think we sold like 30 tickets on the first day that we went to market, in January 2016. So it was really great feeling to kind of see all these people that, had been following us buy the tickets to come to this event in Dublin. And we got 700 people from 34 different countries come to the first event. So whilst it's in Europe, it was actually very global, predominantly European, like 80% European, 20% sort of rest of the world. But founders flew in from India, Australia, Brazil. And I was, again, amazed by this. But it was because they needed this. They wanted this. They wanted to connect with their peers. And at the time, they didn't really have many options, right? They had SaaStock in the US, which was happening in February at the time. There was nothing in Europe. And they needed more events so that they could come and speak to their peers to, kind of get out of their bubble and get a sense check of what are they doing, is it right, and how they could learn from others. And I like to say the rest was history, but obviously there was a lot more to it.
Right, that's fascinating. I mean, I love hearing the stories of inception of the business or conference or whatever, because there's so much inspiration there. Like how do you start something where you potentially don't have any experience? How do you build your audience? How do you um, find the why people would buy or go somewhere? So that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. And I mean, we do our own little events. I mean, I'm not even comparing. We have like, I don't know, 30, 40 people coming together, but still I think you're absolutely right. Just kind of getting out of the bubble and being able to talk to people who potentially are in the same situation or dealing with the same challenges is really valuable. But like you said, the rest is history, but not, well, you've grown so much. Now it's a tremendously big conference. Remind me how many people were this time in Dublin?
This time around, it's just under like 4,000 for
Or that?
the last one in Dublin, and we've also launched in the US last year. So
Yeah.
we had like 700 people in our US event, but this year we're doubling that size, so we're expecting 1,500 in the US, and similarly, just probably just over 4,000 this year in Dublin is our expectation, and we're really looking at it and focusing on, I think, the quality of attendee over the quantity. We don't want to. Our focus is really, founders and investors as the kind of core personas, and obviously their exec teams. And I think, to scale to like 10,000 people, I think there could be, a lot of dilution in the quality of that audience. And it's not something that we want to do, at the moment.
Right. So at first, there was you, basically. You were running the whole thing. What it takes to create um, a conference that big? What is the team like? What is kind of happening behind the scenes? What is the culture there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we've gone through lots of different iterations of culture and lots of different sizes of the teams. I mean, we grew obviously initially, and as I told the inception story at the time, and when I launched and we had the venue, I thought I could do it all by myself, right? And very deluded, and I had a few people say, "Look, no, you're going to need some help, right?" So actually, by the time of the first SaaStock, we were a team of 2.5. But then we had a production team around us, and it looked. We got a lot of feedback that this looked much better than a first time event, and that we probably overspent on it, which we did. But now the team it's I'd still say it's quite lean for the size of company that we are from a revenue perspective, but I think we're just under 20 people. We're like 19 or 20 at the moment. I mean, before COVID, we were 24 people. Then we went to down to 9 people during COVID, just to kind of obviously lower costs and get us through, because revenue went down by about 2/3. Obviously, it was a difficult period when your main source of income is, creating large mass gatherings, and then you couldn't do them anymore. And so we just pivoted to virtual, like most people did. But obviously now very happy to be back in real life. But yeah, we got a team of 20 people, and that's kind of, I would say, our sales and marketing kind of functions. So the go-to-market side of things is just a little bit under 50% of the team. And then we have, I would say, our event operations. It's a 2-person team that kind of really kind of put together the whole event. But they also work with, contractors and production companies on the back end. And then we have other roles like, graphic designers, of course, and community roles, and so on. Obviously myself and, with the senior leadership. And this year we've hired our first time ever role of somebody that's a like director of like product. And sort of with that, what we're looking at, I think, one of the things that's certainly like looking to improve in SaaStock. So whilst it's a great event and it's the leading event in Europe, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the products, over the last few years. And that can be a problem, right? Because obviously you get new entrants into the market, of which there are now many. And, we can't become complacent. We have to think about, innovating and improving the products. And I think because of the size of the team and the lack of focus around the innovation on the product side of things, it's been a little bit, I would say, ignored to date. So we've just been churning out, the same SaaStock, kind of each year, pretty much. Different speakers, you get different attendees, but a lot of the model of what SaaStock is very much the same. But now we're looking at, and specifically with this hire, is how can we improve all the products that we have? How can we introduce new products? How can we get new segments, of the demographic into the conference? So, for instance, one of the things that we may well be doing in the Dublin event this year is a specific event within SaaStock just for those companies that are above Series A and B, C, and the kind of like the scaling companies that have taken venture, and doing something there for them and kind of really giving them a reason to be at SaaStock as well. So very, very excited for that and for what's to come, and just to kind of, keep improving the product and make sure that we stay at the top of our game.
Right, absolutely. So it seems like everyone is moving a little bit up market, including conferences. That's really fascinating to see, because 2023 hasn't been easy for anybody, and working just with the startups maybe still really relevant, but is maybe not as revenue generating as it used to be.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, no, definitely. Just to say to your comment, yeah,
Sure.
I think like the beginning of 2023, I was maybe overly optimistic about, well, SaaS will be fine. I was having these conversations, and look, SaaS continues to be a growth market, and it'll be fine this year. And then obviously, I think the reality is, and that you heard when you're speaking to your customers, and especially when at SaaStock in Dublin, when I was speaking to the attendees, the reality hit, even though I was aware of it. But when you were speaking to the people, everybody in person, everybody was having a very tough year. Like people, especially like those that were selling to like marketers, the marketers weren't buying, their budgets, were closed. And yeah, there was a sense of, look, we're already struggling this year. And so whilst the mood, and we're trying to keep the mood at SaaStock good, and people still, kind of had fun, everybody was having a very, very difficult year. And that was my first experience of SaaS having a bit of a downturn, I would say, because if you look at the growth of SaaStock, really, bar the COVID years, which was still actually pretty good for SaaS, but not necessarily for us because we couldn't do in-person events. But we've grown because we're in such a great market, and we've kind of, partly been riding that wave, or, riding the coattails, because there's a demand for SaaS conferences. There's a demand for founders to meet with investors, and it was at that ever increasing demand, right? And last year, that was a little bit muted. And so whilst we grew 22% last year, it was probably one of the hardest years for us in some of those respects. So we had a record revenue year, but it wasn't easy, right? And for our customers, they were all pretty much struggling.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've been talking to a few investors and people who are in acquisitions, investment, VC, all those spaces, and it's a very interesting observation. I found that most of them actually are saying that money is kind of starting to flow again. So it's getting easier actually in 2024, even though like it just started, but kind of like it's throwing up a little bit. So it's really good. I believe it's if it's really happening, then it's going to be a good year for a lot of SaaS companies because, well, they had the whole year to adjust to like a more startup-y, scratchy, creative kind of narrative, and now with an influx potentially of some new money, they would have an opportunity to spend it wisely. So
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it's definitely, and I'm hopeful it's going to be a better year. I think it's certainly not going to be, I think as it was in 2019 and so on. I mean, I think we're not anytime soon going back to that era of growth at all costs, which was obviously very, very good for businesses like us, because you had sponsors, exhibitors that were paying a lot of money. I mean, they still do, but it paying a lot of money then, and I think it was kind of like without second thought. But now people are really kind of scrutinizing, which events they should be at, which should they be exhibiting at, and really kind of selecting key events and like cornerstone events for them. So we're lucky in some way that SaaStock is a cornerstone event to many SaaS companies. But for others that kind of wanted to maybe dip their toe into the market and see if SaaS is a space for them, we're kind of not seeing as much of that, at the moment, and that's specifically to us. But I think on the whole, on the market, I think we've gone through last year. We would say is a harsh winter. I think spring is coming, but like, at what point in 2024 does spring, come? And then I think we'll be back to better times, certainly in 2025.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the prediction. Let's see if it pans out. But next question is about your growth levers. What are those? So you said you have marketing team, which is about 50% of the company. I
Yeah.
mean, word of mouth, you've got amazing, people talking great things about you.
Yeah.
And what else? Like, what else works? What else doesn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think if we look back, like, how have we grown today, and what are the growth levers sort of now, right? I guess in the beginning, I mean, look, the market has been a big growth lever. I think I kind of like alluded to that, right? So we've created something that people want in a very strong market. That at the time in 2016, when we did the first conference, there was only one other SaaS conference, right? So there wasn't a lot of options for people to come to an event to meet other SaaS founders and investors. We were one of the first in a very strong market. And then as we grew, and we grew 100% year over year for the first few years, it wasn't necessarily science, but effectively, well, certainly I wasn't aware of it at the time. But how do we grow both the event and our revenue? And one thing, I increased the pricing, every year, both on sponsorship and then on the delegate side of things, which then, changing the pricing was a huge growth lever, on revenue for us. I also always had very ambitious targets. So I had, ambitions that the conference would double in size every year. We don't have that anymore. It's very, hard to do. And again, without kind of diluting the quality. But with that, then we were kind of like really pushing the team to hit aggressive targets kind of each year, which is not always easy, but they were kind of real kind of always setting like stretch targets on that front. We also had content as a kind of a growth lever. Certainly more in the early days, and I think we are coming back to that now, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But obviously, SaaStock came out of a blog, which we mentioned was SaaScribe, and the podcast, and through that we had an audience, we had content, we were sort of known in the market at the time, for creating content of value. And we would get a lot of people that also wanted to contribute content still to SaaStock, and that helped grow our awareness globally, both the US, Europe, and beyond. And then I think, as you mentioned, word of mouth. Now that SaaStock really has a really strong word of mouth within Europe, right? And there are a lot of VCs. We get hundreds of VCs each year that come to SaaStock, that know of it as a quality event, that they'll get quality meetings, that they'll meet the right people there. And they're not reading our content. They don't, I don't know if they read our emails or, look at our ads. They just know that SaaStock is one of the few events that they need to go to each year. And then they talk amongst themselves as like, who's going to SaaStock, or you should go to this event. And word of mouth is, whilst it's hard to measure, it is a really strong driver of our growth in Europe. Now, we don't have that in the US at the moment. So we have our US conference, which we launched last year. We don't have that word of mouth because it was the first time conference. We don't have that awareness, that credibility. So we're having to do, many things and like go beyond our email list. And it is much harder, but we will get there. And then just like on the content marketing side, really since COVID, well, as I mentioned, we cut the team down to 9 people, which included at the time no longer having anyone in content marketing. And the podcast was really the only piece of content, plus our event content, that we sustained and kind of systematically kind of put out. But what we saw with that was a dramatic drop in website traffic, for instance, right? And with that, obviously, you're going to get a drop in awareness, and certainly, in certain regions, and for newer companies are coming around that don't know SaaStock. So actually, I wanted to do it last year, but this year, and she actually just joined last week, we've been hiring for a head of content marketing to really get back to our roots, to kind of remember, look, we came from SaaScribe, we came from a community-driven blog, a newsletter, the podcast. We had the audience there; they were engaged, and recently that's been missing. So now we need to kind of reinvest in this, bring this back, recreate. And the vision is to have SaaStock as one of the leading sources for SaaS founders, and investors, and execs on the internet to come to our website, learn how to build, grow a SaaS company, get the relevant information. So we're now kind of reinvesting in that to kind of go back to our roots almost, which really enabled the company. But yeah, I think those are the things. So obviously we've got great credibility and word of mouth in Europe. We're seeing that we have to do more work because we don't have that in the US, which is an interesting challenge. We've always been on the sales side, really. I would say, like, if you look at the last 7-8 years, a very sales driven company, and that's driven a lot of our results, and we've kind of done really well on that front. And now we're just kind of looking at like how do we supplement that, beyond obviously having that ability and doing it well to drive revenue. Where can we add value like beyond that? International expansion is obviously a revenue or a driver of growth for us as well. So when you look at how does an event company grow, Well, you either have to, add more attendees to your existing event, create new events, increase the pricing. These are the levers that you can pull. And we've pulled all of these, at various times. But like I mentioned with Dublin, we don't, at the moment, we're not thinking about this as a 10,000 person event. We want it to be a quality, 4,000 person event, maybe, give or take a few numbers. But with that, once we kind of really get to the vision where we want that this is, even higher quality, then we may be able to, justify increasing the pricing, again on that specific event. But yeah, right now, international expansion is a big part of our growth strategy. But we've got visions to really kind of scale this business, hopefully to one day be 100 million business.
Okay, fingers crossed. I mean, looks like, people love you. Like I said, whenever I ask about like where do you go, like where do you network? Because like in acquisitions, founder burnout, founders being stuck in their bubble, not really being able to get out of building a product and building a company. Um, is a big deal. It's kind of a big topic, and it's been like one of the most successful episodes on the podcast ever is avoiding founder burnout, and that says something. So I guess yeah, people are really hungry for for a community, and it's great that you're building one. So what are the trends that you see SaaStock that are being, very prominent, something that founders discuss, and maybe there is something, exciting that you brought with you from the last SaaStock that you're willing to share?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like there are trends around, I would say, like where SaaS is going. But then I also, and it's good that you mentioned the founder burnout. Like then there are trends that more on the personal side, right, and on the founder side, that we see, and I think it's important. And SaaStock, covers all of these, both through our conferences, our content, and also our founder membership product, which is like a support network for SaaS founders that we pulled together because we understand that you can't figure this out all by yourself, even though some people think they're smart enough to do so, or in many cases do try and figure it out all by themselves. And just in my own personal example of building SaaStock, like I mentioned, I thought in the beginning I could do it all by myself, but realized I needed a team. But then for the, I guess, kind of first 4 years of SaaStock, I wasn't really speaking to anybody else that had done it before, like in terms of scaling, events businesses. I was a solo founder, and there was a lot that I was taking on, kind of like personally, and trying to figure out, myself, and making so many mistakes along the way, which certainly, whilst we were a growth business, impacted our growth, and it created more stress, and for me and for the team, and so on. And so thus, like having now done this for 8 years and spoken to thousands of founders, we know that you can't figure it out all by yourself, right? It's better to have a support network around you, certainly that one of peers that are doing it or have been there and done it, that can help you avoid the potholes and mistakes. So we created the SaaS founder membership to do that. And then also personally for myself, I'm in a support network of entrepreneurs that I meet up with on a monthly basis, and it's like founder therapy. You kind of go there, you kind of have your afternoon together with the other founders. You go through your problems and what's working, what's not working, etc. And afterwards, there's a bit of a weight that's been lifted. But also, apart from that, you'll learn things which can really help move the dial, on the business. So I'm a big believer in that. And so, like from a trend of, I would say probably the last couple of years, SaaStock has been covering, burnout, founder sort of mental health and well-being. We've been having specific content around that, and you could see, I think, like I mentioned in the podcast already, that at the event in October in Dublin, there was this feeling of like people were struggling. Their businesses were not growing. They didn't have the answers, but by getting together, they realized that they were not alone. In this, right? That it was really mostly a state of the market that we were in, right? So we kind of help connect people around that to help make them feel less less bad about themselves and less lonely. Obviously, I mean, from the SaaS kind of like product side of things, AI is the dominating trend. Kind of like right now. Interestingly enough, because I mean, it was very big last. AI, I would think, was the main trend last year, right? And I think it still continues to be the big trend this year. I think like previous years, it was PLG this, PLG that. And then last year, like, didn't really hear anybody really talk about PLG too much, and it was all AI, kind of everything. And everybody has to be an AI company, whether you're a legacy SaaS, you've got to build AI into your product, or you're just if you're a born native into SaaS, AI has to be in your product. And this is very true. But at SaaStock in Dublin, we made sure to have a lot of AI content. And just interestingly, with our competitors out there, I saw that they still kind of have the same old content, like how do you scale to 500 million in revenue and a lot of the go-to-market stuff, but they weren't, bringing in anything about AI, which was obviously the topic that everybody kind of really wanted to know and learn about. And so we're continuing with that. This year we've just published podcasts recently on how AI will, impact the software industry. There's going to be a lot of AI content at SaaStock USA, again in SaaStock in Dublin. AI is here to stay, and I think right now everybody's really kind of hungry to learn. How do we build AI products? How do we bring it into our existing products if we're an established SaaS business? And what is it going to do, and so on. So there's a lot of hype around it, and sometimes it is a bit of an overhyped market in some respects, and certainly maybe on the investment side. But it's also very exciting, right? And I think it's a big kind of like sea change for SaaS, a new kind of innovation that's really going to help SaaS, again, be around for the next 20, 30 years or more.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, it was everyone was talking about AI. Either they're leveraging for their existing businesses, or they're building something new based on AI. We had a conference called Code Talks, and it's a very techy, nerdy kind of thing in Germany. And AI, of course, was a very, very prominent topic. And in one of the panels, ChatGPT was one of the uh, persons, I don't know how
Panelists,
to
yeah.
yeah, one of the panelists. So it was really fascinating to see. And I mean, obviously, VCs are a little bit, I guess, cautious about investing in especially in younger AI powered companies, but it's definitely a trend that everybody's talking about it.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
even I mean, whilst I mentioned about the importance of, I mean, AI for the SaaS companies and those that that are coming to our conference, I'm also and we're being asked, and we're looking into how do we, as an events business, bring AI, into our conference, right?
Exactly.
And what are the ways that we have to do that? Because I think we have to adapt as well, right? And we have to start using AI, and how do we maybe use AI to personalize programs based on the data that we've got for each individual attendee, or like you said, having them as a panelist, or transcribing content into different languages, or even just into English in real time. Right. So I think these are some of the things. Obviously, we've got to look at costs and our P&L and things like that, and we can't invest in all of these AI platforms and make SaaStock a fully like AI conference. But we're going to look at things and what can we do, and so that we just again kind of keep up with the times.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Okay, well, I do have a couple more questions, kind of the usual ones here. And the first one is, what has been so far the biggest win and the biggest failure for you at SaaStock, or for
Yep.
SaaStock in general as a business?
Yeah, good question. Um, The biggest win. I mean, look, I'd like to think that being first in the market in Europe and choosing Dublin, so the timing, maybe could you call the timing a win? You know, you could also call it luck, right? But the timing was good for us, right? And that's kind of really enabled us and helped us be first to market, and therefore we, keep that position that we had. But also the choice of Dublin as the location for the conference really has, I think, plays a big part into our success, because I think just the city works so well for our event. It's smaller than London. There's a lot of serendipity that happens. It's a lot of fun. People love traveling to Ireland. I think these two things, we obviously have many other wins, but just kind of off the top of my head, have really kind of been pivotal in the success of SaaStock. So had we started a couple of years later, had we chosen another city, I don't think we'd be number one in the market.
Interesting. Okay. Well, obviously for me, the fact that you're in Ireland is not a win.
What,
Because
because of the weather?
no, because of the visa.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, what about the biggest failure?
Biggest failure, potentially in, or maybe like 2019, I had this sort of vision of expanding SaaStock globally, but rather than going, which is the sensible approach, which we're kind of again sort of now taking, one country at a time. So effectively, what you should do, you build up one conference, you make sure it's kind of profitable enough that that can support you launching into a new market. Because as you launch into a new market, it's likely that your first event will lose money. Then the second year that you'll break even, and the third year that you enter profitability. And generally, that's the kind of rule of thumb. But I, just with my, I don't know, a mad sort of idea, said, let's go to 5 continents, have 5 conferences in 5 continents in 1 year. So we expanded from the Dublin event to then having 2 events in the US, one in Latin America, one in Asia, one in Australia. And really that stretched the team, because we're constantly having to deliver events. And unfortunately, Australia was last in the calendar. So that didn't really get worked on until like a month and a half before the event. So it kind of always suffered a little bit, because of that. It stretched the team, it sucked a lot of cash out of the business. So whilst the revenue grew in 2019, it was a very difficult year, very stressful year for the team. Sucked so much cash out of the business. I wouldn't do it again. So whilst I won't say that SaaStock will never do 5 conferences in 5 continents, it's just like doing it all in one and going expanding internationally in one go, across the globe, was not a good idea. So yeah, don't do that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, when somebody learned that, I'm going to interview you on the podcast, they were like, "Oh yeah, you should do SaaS talk in Vietnam." You suggest that to Alex. They're like, "No,
I mean,
I."
we get a lot of why don't you do SaaStock in India, and why don't you do it here and there and so on, right? And they're all lovely ideas, and I'd love to do that in some respects, but very very difficult to do. And it obviously makes sense for us to be in the US, which is the biggest market for software, the biggest market for events. So we believe that we can scale that event to maybe be, even bigger than the Dublin event. But we're looking at that one step at a time before we expand. But there may be a future where we're in Latin America and we're in Asia as well. But it's certainly not within the next kind of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So the last question is always about hack. So, what would be your advice or how that works for you that helps build that community? Because like community was kind of also a buzzword in, let me check my timeline. I guess 2021. Everyone wanted a community. Everyone was
Yeah.
who was working with product, especially tech product. When you're selling to developers, you have to be one of them, right? You have to be in the community. You have to have like a supportive, very active. people around you. So how to do that? What would be your advice, or yeah, a hack that worked for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say like I don't know if like any hacks have worked for me necessarily, but in starting a community, like you said, I think there was an explosion of communities in 2020, 21, and again maybe correlated to people couldn't get together in person, and that kind of continued. But I think it's been a little bit again like fatigued and sort of died down a little bit in terms of it being mentioned as much. But in order to build a community, like you got to start with like how we did with the blog, right? You start with the why, right? And you like why would people join this community over all the other ones that existed? And they have to believe in that why and believe in that purpose, and then they have to believe in the quality, of the people that are there. So what we found quite sort of was a challenge when we built the SaaStock founder membership initially, is the concept and the why was, look, we're going to bring together SaaS founders that are on their scaling journey to 10 million in ARR, and you're going to support one another. But how do you get that first person in when there's nobody else there, right? And they have to take a leap of faith, and they have to believe in you. Believe in me, believe like in SaaStock, but believe in the why and that higher purpose. And effectively, what they're buying into is that vision, that higher purpose, that why. That's why they'll join. And then you've obviously got to back that up, right? But I think in order to kind of get that started, maybe a lot of communities have kind of gone in and they've launched something and, oh, we'll launch something for SaaS founders or for product managers or whatever, but they've not really thought of the why, right? And I think maybe that's where, and maybe they don't believe in the why, they're just doing it because it's a trend. But if you like, we purposely, passionately believe in this because we've seen it, for 8 years. I've experienced it myself. That SaaS founders need to be around other SaaS founders to support one another to help them grow, and we want to build the world's leading organization for SaaS founders to be able to do that. And that makes it a bit more compelling, I would say, or a lot more compelling for SaaS founders to kind of join our community over somebody else, right? So start with the why, Simon Sinek stuff, but it's true, right?
Yeah, so thank you, Alex. Like I said, it's really great to every time hear founders talk about SaaStock and the opportunities that they found there. Like just today, this morning, I interviewed Esben from Userflow,
Okay,
and
yeah.
he told me, yeah, how he met the acquirers of Userflow at SaaStock, and Michael Kumpliner from SWAT.io as well, a huge fan. And I mean, I can probably go on, right? So I think you're doing a great job, and I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with you that yeah, remote is great, asynchronous is great, but founders do really need a network and do need to get out of their bubble. So yeah, thanks for giving all of us this incredible opportunity.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I've found my purpose in life. I think, like accidentally, and like I'm really kind of grateful that what we've built with SaaStock is adding. It's making a real difference. It's adding a lot of value, and great to hear as well. The stories like Esben's where he met his acquirers at SaaStock. It's just fantastic to hear such stories, and there's been many of them, and I hope there'll be many more. I'm sure there will be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks so much for telling the story, and happy to do this again sometime, and hopefully this year I'll even make it to SaaStock.
Yeah, we start the visa application early, and I'll be
Yes,
happy to help and sign the letter. Yeah,
awesome. Thanks so much. All right. Well,
no
thanks
worries.
so much for the episode, and take care.